Welcome to Ludical Connections, a space where we explore personal growth, relationships, and the deeper aspects of human connection. Today, we are diving into a subject that often carries both fear and immense potential: vulnerability. Vulnerability is frequently misunderstood, sometimes seen as a weakness or something to be avoided in relationships, friendships, and even personal growth. But the truth is, vulnerability is a powerful tool that can transform our connections with others and create more authentic, meaningful relationships. In this video, we'll talk about the power of vulnerability, why it's essential for deepening your relationships, and how to embrace it in a way that builds trust and closeness. Let's begin by defining what we mean by vulnerability. Vulnerability is the willingness to open yourself up emotionally, to be seen for who you truly are, without hiding behind walls of protection. It means showing your true feelings, fears, and insecurities, and sharing those parts of yourself with others. Vulnerability is about authenticity. It's about showing up in your relationships as your true self, even when that feels uncomfortable or scary. Vulnerability might involve sharing your past, your struggles, or your hopes and dreams, even at the risk of being judged or misunderstood. But it's through this openness that real connection happens. One of the reasons vulnerability is so powerful is because it fosters trust. When you allow yourself to be vulnerable with someone, you're essentially saying, "I trust you enough to show you my authentic self." In turn, this often encourages the other person to do the same. When both people in a relationship or friendship are willing to be vulnerable, it creates a deep sense of mutual trust and understanding. Think about the most meaningful connections in your life. Chances are, they're built on a foundation of vulnerability. When someone opens up to you, it makes you feel closer to them, and it encourages you to be open in return. Vulnerability also allows for empathy. When we share our struggles and challenges, it helps others understand what we're going through. Likewise, when someone is vulnerable with us, it gives us insight into their inner world. Empathy is the bridge that connects us emotionally, and vulnerability is the key to opening that door. For example, if you're going through a difficult time, sharing those feelings with a friend or partner allows them to empathize with you and offer support. Similarly, when someone shares their vulnerabilities with you, it invites you to step into their shoes and offer compassion. This is how deep emotional bonds are formed. However, many of us struggle with vulnerability because we fear rejection or judgment. It's natural to want to protect ourselves from being hurt, especially if we've experienced pain or betrayal in the past. But the problem with avoiding vulnerability is that it often leads to emotional distance. When we put up walls to protect ourselves, we're also keeping others at arm's length. This can prevent relationships from growing and evolving into something deeper and more meaningful. The truth is, vulnerability carries risks, but it also carries the potential for incredible rewards. It's through vulnerability that we build true intimacy and connection. One of the most important things to understand about vulnerability is that it's not about oversharing or dumping all your feelings on someone. Healthy vulnerability involves discerning when and with whom to share your feelings. It's about building trust gradually and creating a safe space for open communication. For example, in a new relationship, you might start by sharing small parts of yourself and seeing how the other person responds. If they react with understanding and empathy, it signals that it's safe to be more vulnerable. If they respond with judgment or dismissal, it may indicate that this person isn't ready to meet you at the level of emotional intimacy you need. Vulnerability requires balance. It's about sharing enough to foster connection without overwhelming the other person. Let's talk about how vulnerability shows up in different types of relationships. In romantic relationships, vulnerability is key to emotional intimacy. Sharing your fears, insecurities, and dreams with your partner allows them to see you more fully. When both partners are vulnerable, it creates a deeper bond and a sense of safety. It's important to remember that vulnerability isn't just about sharing the good parts of ourselves. It's also about being honest when things aren't going well. For example, if you're feeling insecure in the relationship, expressing that vulnerability can lead to a productive conversation that strengthens the connection rather than allowing it to fester and cause distance. In friendships, vulnerability creates closeness and trust. Friendships that allow for vulnerability are often the most meaningful because they go beyond surface-level conversations. When you share your struggles, joys, and everything in between with a friend, it shows that you trust them with your inner world. In return, they're likely to feel more comfortable opening up to you. Vulnerability deepens friendships and creates a sense of mutual support and understanding. It's the difference between a casual acquaintance and a lifelong friend. In family relationships, vulnerability can be both challenging and transformative. Family dynamics can be complicated, and many of us have grown up in environments where vulnerability wasn't encouraged or modeled. But opening up to family members, whether it's sharing a difficult experience, expressing your emotions, or being honest about who you are, can pave the way for healing and deeper connection. Vulnerability in families often requires patience and forgiveness, especially if past hurts have created emotional distance. But by being vulnerable, you can start to break down walls and rebuild trust over time. It's important to recognize that vulnerability is a practice, not a one-time event. It takes time to build the confidence and trust required to be vulnerable, and it's something that grows over time in relationships. If you're new to practicing vulnerability, start small. Share a personal story with a trusted friend or partner and see how it feels. Notice how the other person responds. If they react with empathy and understanding, it will encourage you to continue being open. Over time, as you see that vulnerability leads to deeper connection, it will become easier to embrace. Another aspect of vulnerability is self-compassion. Being vulnerable means being willing to share your imperfections, mistakes, and flaws. But in order to do that, you need to have compassion for yourself. Self-compassion means accepting that you're human, that it's okay to make mistakes, and that you're worthy of love and connection even when you're not perfect. When you practice self-compassion, it becomes easier to be vulnerable with others because you're not as afraid of judgment or rejection. You understand that your worth isn't dependent on being perfect. It's about being authentic. Let's also talk about how vulnerability can improve your relationships in practical ways. When you're vulnerable, conflict becomes easier to navigate. Instead of reacting defensively or avoiding difficult conversations, vulnerability allows you to approach conflict with openness and honesty. For example, if you've had an argument with your partner, being vulnerable means expressing how the situation made you feel rather than blaming or criticizing them. You might say, "I felt hurt when you didn't include me in that decision," rather than, "You never think about my feelings." This approach fosters understanding and allows for resolution rather than escalation. Vulnerability also plays a huge role in building trust. Trust is the foundation of any strong relationship, and vulnerability is the way we build that foundation. When you allow yourself to be vulnerable, you're showing the other person that you trust them with your emotions and experiences. In return, this often leads to a deeper sense of trust on both sides. Trust and vulnerability go hand in hand. When we trust someone, we're more likely to be vulnerable with them. And when we're vulnerable, we build trust. Finally, vulnerability leads to personal growth. It's not just about improving your relationships with others, it's also about improving your relationship with yourself. When you practice vulnerability, you're learning to accept yourself as you are, flaws and all. You're learning to let go of the need for perfection and embrace the messy, beautiful reality of being human. This leads to greater self-awareness, emotional resilience, and a deeper sense of connection with others and yourself. In conclusion, vulnerability is one of the most powerful tools we have for creating meaningful connections. It allows us to build trust, foster empathy, and deepen our relationships in ways that wouldn't be possible without it. While vulnerability can be scary, the rewards far outweigh the risks. By embracing vulnerability, you're opening the door to more authentic, fulfilling relationships and personal growth. Thank you for watching Ludical Connections. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might benefit from learning about the power of vulnerability in connections. Stay tuned for more content on relationships, personal growth, and emotional well-being.